The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension as Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through the massive archway. Her simple black uniform stood out starkly against the elaborate ceremonial robes worn by the other delegates. The Zephyrian representative's scales shimmered blue with amusement, while the insectoid Crick's ambassador clicked his mandibles in what Sarah had learned was their version of laughter. Sarah kept her expression neutral as she approached the central podium. 3 years of diplomatic training had taught her to mask her emotions, even when facing a room full of aliens who clearly viewed humanity as inferior. The Earth's request had been simple enough, or so she thought. They needed access to advanced weaponry to defend their outer colonies from the increasing pirate raids that had been plaguing human space. The Hegemony Council had been less than receptive to humanity's plea for help. Earth had only been part of the galactic community for 15 years, making them newcomers in a political landscape that had existed for millennia. Most species still viewed humans as primitive upstarts who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than genuine advancement. "The human delegation may present their request," announced Councillor Vexthara, the ethereal who served as the current session moderator. Her voice carried the musical quality typical of her species, but Sarah detected the underlying condescension that had become all too familiar during these negotiations. Sarah activated the holographic projector built into the podium, displaying images of the recent attacks on human colonies. Scorched settlements, destroyed mining operations, and casualty reports filled the air above the assembly. The silence that followed was telling, not one of sympathy, but of barely contained mockery. "Honorable councilors," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the hostility radiating from the assembled delegates. "The human colonies in the Outer Rim have suffered 17 major attacks in the past 6 months. Our current defensive capabilities are insufficient to protect our civilian populations from increasingly organized pirate fleets." The Crick's ambassador's chittering grew louder. "Perhaps the humans should consider retreating to their home system if they cannot defend their territory," he said, his translated words dripping with disdain. "The galaxy is not a place for those too weak to protect themselves." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she pressed on. "We're not asking for charity, Counselor. Earth is prepared to offer significant trade concessions and technological exchanges in return for access to standard defensive weapon systems." "Standard?" The Zephyrian delegate's scales now flickered a deep purple, indicating either amusement or contempt. "Humans barely understand the basics of energy manipulation. You expect us to arm primitives with weapons they could turn against their benefactors." Sarah's hands clenched at her sides, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. "Our technological assessments indicate that we can safely operate Class 3 plasma cannons and particle beam arrays. We've provided detailed compatibility studies." "Compatibility studies?" The interruption came from the Velter representative, whose crystalline form pulsed with harsh light. "You've been in space for less than 2 decades. Some of us have been building warships since before your species discovered fire." The chamber erupted in what could only be described as alien laughter. The sound was a cacophony of clicks, hisses, musical tones, and electronic buzzes that made Sarah's skin crawl. She had expected resistance, but the level of outright mockery was worse than her briefings had prepared her for. "Perhaps," said another voice, this one belonging to the massive Gorlak delegate whose rocky skin made him look like a living mountain, "the humans could try throwing rocks at their enemies. It seems more appropriate to their level of development." More laughter filled the chamber. Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks, but years of diplomatic training kept her voice level. "If I may remind the Council, humanity has successfully developed FTL travel, established 47 colonies across 12 systems, and maintained peaceful relations with all contacted species. We've proven our capability for responsible expansion." "Responsible?" The Crick's ambassador's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Your species strip mines entire asteroids, pollutes atmosphere, and breeds like insects. You call this responsible?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her failure settling on her shoulders. She had one last card to play, though she knew it was a long shot. The intelligence reports from Earth had mentioned classified human military projects, things that were supposedly being developed in secret. She didn't have clearance for the details, but desperate times called for desperate measures. "Council members," she said, her voice carrying a new edge of determination. If you won't provide us with standard defensive systems, then Earth formally requests access to more specialized equipment. We need something capable of handling the escalating threat levels in our territory." The laughter in the chamber began to die down, replaced by curious murmurs. Several delegates leaned forward, apparently intrigued by this shift in the humans' approach. "Specialized equipment?" Counselor Vexthara's melodic voice carried a note of genuine interest. "What exactly are you requesting, Ambassador Chen?" Sarah took another deep breath, knowing she was about to step far outside her authorized parameters. But the images of burning colonies and casualty reports gave her the courage to continue. "Earth requests access to any weapons classified above standard defensive systems, something with enough firepower to send a clear message to these pirates that humanity will not be driven from the stars." The silence that followed was different from before. Where there had been mockery, now there was a kind of shocked surprise. Several delegates exchanged glances that Sarah couldn't interpret, and she noticed that the massive form of General Korak, the Gorvani military advisor, had straightened in his seat. Above standard systems, the Velter delegate's crystal form pulsed with rapid flashes of light. "You're requesting access to military-grade weaponry. Do you understand what you're asking for?" Sarah nodded firmly. "I understand perfectly. Our colonies are dying, and standard defenses clearly aren't enough. If we're going to survive in this galaxy, we need something with real teeth." The Krix ambassador's chittering had stopped entirely. Humans couldn't possibly handle advanced military systems. The power requirements alone would overload their primitive reactors. "Let them try," suggested the Gorlak delegate with what sounded like grim humor. "When their ships explode from weapon feedback, it will solve the problem of human expansion permanently." More nervous laughter rippled through the chamber, but Sarah noticed that several of the military advisors weren't joining in. General Korak in particular seemed to be studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. His species, the Gorvani, were known throughout the galaxy as master strategists and warriors. If anyone in this room would understand the implications of her request, it would be him. "Very well," Counselor Vexthara said, her musical voice now carrying an edge of ice. "If the humans insist on reaching beyond their capabilities, the Council will consider their request. However, I should warn you that military-grade weapons are not toys. They require extensive training, proper infrastructure, and most importantly, the wisdom to use them responsibly." "We understand the risks," Sarah replied, though privately she wondered if she really did. "Earth is prepared to meet any reasonable requirements for training and certification." The Zephyrian delegate's scales had shifted to a deep red now, a color Sarah had learned indicated either extreme anger or extreme amusement. "Perhaps we should give them exactly what they're asking for," he said, his voice carrying a dangerous purr. "After all, some lessons are best learned through experience." The chamber fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. There was an undercurrent of anticipation, as if the assembled delegates were waiting for something. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that her desperate gambit might have unintended consequences. General Korak slowly rose from his seat, his massive frame casting a shadow across the chamber floor. When he spoke, his voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the deck plating. "If the humans truly wish to access advanced military systems," he said, "then perhaps they should be given the opportunity to prove themselves worthy." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Sarah could feel hostile gazes boring into her from every direction, but she kept her chin up and her shoulders square. Whatever happened next, she had committed Earth to this course of action. "What did you have in mind, General?" Counselor Vexthara asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Korak's cold eyes fixed on Sarah with predatory intensity. "There are weapons systems available that would certainly meet the humans' criteria for specialized equipment. Systems that would indeed send a clear message to anyone who dares threaten human colonies." Sarah felt her mouth go dry, but she forced herself to speak. "We're prepared to meet whatever requirements you deem necessary, General." "Are you?" Korak's question carried ominous weight. "Because the weapons I'm thinking of come with certain complications. They're not the kind of systems that can be safely integrated into just any fleet." The other delegates were watching this exchange with what Sarah could only describe as morbid fascination. She got the distinct impression that she had just walked into some kind of trap, but it was too late to back down now. Earth's colonies were counting on her to bring back something that could protect them. Earth stands ready to face any challenge, she said, hopping. Her voice sounded more confident than she felt. General Korak stepped down from his elevated position, his heavy footsteps echoing through the suddenly quiet chamber. As he approached the central podium where Sarah stood, she noticed the intricate battle scars that crisscrossed his dark green hide. Each mark told a story of conflicts spanning decades, possibly centuries given the extended lifespans of his species. "Tell me, Ambassador Chen," Korak said, stopping just close enough that Sarah had to crane her neck to look up at his imposing form. "What do you know of the hegemony's weapons classification system?" Sarah straightened her shoulders, drawing on her diplomatic training to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Class 1 through Class 5 energy weapons, with Classes 6 and above reserved for capital ship deployment. We've requested access to Class 3 systems, which should be more than sufficient for colony defense. A sound that might have been laughter rumbled from deep in Korak's chest. "Class 3, he repeated as if tasting something bitter. "Standard patrol craft armament, useful for discouraging smugglers and minor raiders." His eyes, each the size of Sarah's fist, fixed on her with unsettling intensity. "But you requested access to systems above standard defensive capabilities, did you not?" The chamber had grown so quiet that Sarah could hear the subtle hum of the environmental systems. Every delegate seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for her response. She realized that this moment would define not just the outcome of these negotiations, but potentially humanity's entire relationship with the galactic community. "Yes, General," she said firmly. "Our intelligence reports suggest that the pirates attacking our colonies have access to military-grade equipment. Class 3 systems won't be enough to protect our people." Korak nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this answer. "Intelligence reports," he mused. "Interesting. And what do these reports tell you about the origins of this military-grade pirate equipment?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The implication in his question was clear, and suddenly the puzzle pieces began falling into place. The reason the council seemed so reluctant to help, the undercurrent of hostility she'd sensed since arriving, it wasn't just about human capabilities. "You're saying the pirates are using hegemony weapons," she said, the words coming out as more of a statement than a question. "Not exactly," Korak replied, his massive head tilting slightly. "But close enough. The weapons being used against your colonies are indeed of advanced design, not current hegemony standard, but certainly beyond what any legitimate arms dealer would sell to pirates." The Zephyrian delegate's scales flickered to a pale yellow, a color Sarah didn't recognize. "General, perhaps this line of discussion should be taken to a more private venue." "No," Korak's voice cut through the air like a blade. "The humans have requested advanced weapons to deal with an advanced threat. They deserve to understand exactly what they're asking for." Sarah's mind raced as she processed the implications. "You're talking about black market weapons, military systems that aren't supposed to exist in civilian hands." "Clever girl," the Krik's ambassador chittered, though there was no amusement in the sound now. "Yes, Ambassador Chen. Your colonies are being attacked by raiders using stolen, outdated, or illegally manufactured weapons that technically shouldn't exist. This is why the Council has been reluctant to arm humanity with equivalent firepower." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they revealed was far more complex than Sarah had anticipated. "Because if you give us advanced weapons, and some of them end up in the wrong hands, the problem gets worse for everyone." "Precisely." Counselor Vexthara's musical voice had lost all traces of condescension, replaced by something that sounded almost like respect. "The galactic arms trade is a carefully regulated system. When weapons slip through the cracks, they tend to find their way to exactly the kind of people who are currently attacking your colonies." Korak crossed his massive arms, the gesture somehow making him look even more intimidating. "Which brings us back to your request, Ambassador. You want weapons capable of defeating military-grade pirate equipment. There are such systems available, but they come from a very special category of the hegemony's arsenal." "Special category?" Sarah asked, though she had a growing suspicion that she wasn't going to like the answer. "Experimental weapons," Korak said bluntly. "Systems that are too dangerous, too unreliable, or too morally questionable for standard deployment. We call them black classification weapons, systems that officially don't exist but are maintained for situations where conventional options have proven insufficient. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Sarah noticed that several of the delegates had unconsciously moved further away from where she and Korak stood, as if distance could protect them from whatever the general was about to reveal. "You're talking about giving humanity access to weapons that your own military won't use," Sarah said slowly. "Not exactly," Korak corrected. "Black classification weapons are used by hegemony forces, but only under very specific circumstances and with extensive safety protocols. They're the kind of systems you deploy when the alternative is total annihilation." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "And you think our situation warrants that level of response?" "I think," Korak said, his voice taking on a grim quality, "that your pirate problem is about to become a galactic problem. The intelligence reports you mentioned, they only tell part of the story. These aren't random raiders looking for easy targets. Someone is organizing them, arming them, and pointing them specifically at human colonies." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're saying this is a coordinated campaign against humanity?" "We don't know for certain," the Velter delegate interjected, his crystalline form pulsing with rapid flashes of nervous light. "But the pattern of attacks, the escalation in firepower, the timing, it all suggests a level of organization that goes beyond simple piracy." The Gorlak delegate's rocky features shifted into what might have been a frown. "If someone is using pirates as a proxy force against humanity, then arming humans with standard weapons won't solve the problem. It will just escalate the conflict." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had come here asking for simple defensive systems, but the situation was far more complex than Earth's leadership had understood. "So, what are you proposing, General?" Korak's expression became unreadable. "There are 3 black classification systems that might suit your needs. Each comes with its own risks and requirements." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "The first is called Nova Burn, a directed stellar energy weapon that can crack a planet's crust, effective but with obvious potential for catastrophic misuse." Sarah's eyes widened. "You're talking about planet killers." "The second option is Void Touch, gravity manipulation weapons that can tear apart the molecular structure of anything they hit. Highly effective against both ships and installations, but the technology is so advanced that even understanding how to maintain them requires years of specialized training." The chamber had become so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. "And the third option?" Korak was quiet for a long moment, his massive form perfectly still. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly through the silent chamber. "Black Talon." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several delegates actually recoiled as if they'd been struck. The Zephyrian representative's scales went completely black, while the Krix ambassador's chittering became so rapid it sounded like static. Even Counselor Vexthara's musical voice took on a discordant quality. "General," she said urgently, "that system is restricted under Protocol 7. Even discussing it requires." "The humans asked for weapons above standard classification," Korak interrupted, his voice now carrying an edge of steel. "Black Talon fits that criteria perfectly." Sarah looked around the chamber, nodding the fear in every alien face, or at least, what she assumed was fear given the dramatic changes in posture and coloration she was witnessing. "What exactly is Black Talon?" Korak's cold eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. "Black Talon is what happens when you take human military philosophy and combine it with hegemony technology." The words hung in the air like a curse. Sarah felt her mouth go dry, but she forced herself to speak. "Human military philosophy, but humanity has barely been part of the galactic community for 15 years, Korak finished. "Long enough for some very interesting intelligence reports to reach hegemony high command. Long enough for us to realize that humans approach warfare very differently than any species we've previously encountered." Sarah's training told her to ask for clarification, to gather more information before committing to anything. But looking around the chamber at the fear in every alien face, she realized that she might have stumbled onto something far more significant than just a weapons request. "Different how?" she asked. Korak's smile revealed teeth like obsidian daggers. "Most species fight to achieve specific objectives, territory, resources, political goals. Humans fight to win. The silence that followed Korak's words was heavy with implications Sarah was only beginning to understand. She watched as several delegates shifted uncomfortably, their alien features displaying what could only be described as unease. The Crick's ambassador's mandibles clicked in a slow, rhythmic pattern that her briefings had identified as a sign of deep anxiety. "I'm not sure I understand the distinction, General," Sarah said, though something deep in her gut suggested she did understand, and that the truth was going to be more disturbing than she wanted to admit. Korak began packing around the central podium, his massive form moving with surprising grace. When the Zephyrians fought the mineral wars 3 centuries ago, they sought to secure access to rare Earth deposits in the Kepler sector. Specific objective, limited scope. When the war became too costly, they negotiated a settlement. The Zephyrian delegates' scales flickered between purple and silver, colors Sarah had learned indicated embarrassment or shame. "The casualties were becoming unsustainable," he said defensively. "Rational beings know when to seek compromise." "Precisely," Korak agreed. "Rational military doctrine. Fight until the cost exceeds the potential benefit, then negotiate. This is how civilized species conduct warfare." He stopped packing and fixed his predatory gaze on Sarah. Humans, however, seemed to operate under a different set of principles entirely. Sarah felt a chill running down her spine, but she kept her voice steady. "What principles are those?" "Total commitment," Korak said simply. "When humans go to war, they don't fight for territory or resources or political advantage. They fight for survival, for the right to continue existing. And when a species is fighting for its very existence, conventional rules of engagement become inadequate." The massive Gorlak delegate's rocky features shifted into what might have been a grimace. "The general is referring to the historical analysis conducted by hegemony intelligence on human military conflicts. The reports make for disturbing reading." Sarah's diplomatic training warred with her growing curiosity. Part of her wanted to end this conversation and retreat to safer ground, but she needed to understand what they were discussing. What did the analysis reveal? Korak activated a holographic display above the podium, and images began flowing through the air, scenes from Earth's history that Sarah recognized from her education. Ancient battlefields, medieval sieges, industrial warfare, and modern conflicts. But these images were annotated with alien text and analysis markers, turning human history into a clinical study. "Your species has engaged in warfare continuously for its entire recorded history," Korak began, his voice taking on the tone of a lecturer. "But more significantly, humans have repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to escalate conflicts far beyond what any rational species would consider acceptable." The images shifted to show specific battles: Thermopylae, Stalingrad, Iwo Jima, dozens of others where humans had fought against overwhelming odds rather than surrender. When faced with superior force, most species will negotiate or retreat. Humans tend to fight harder. Sarah felt a strange mix of pride and horror as she watched her species' military history being dissected by alien intelligence analysts. "We fight for what we believe in." "You fight to extinction," the Velter delegate corrected, his crystalline form pulsing with agitated light. "The analysis shows that humans will continue fighting long past the point where victory becomes impossible. You've documented cases where entire armies chose death over surrender, where civilian populations fought with improvised weapons against professional military forces." The Crick's ambassador's chittering had taken on a nervous quality. "The concept is almost incomprehensible to most galactic species. Why continue fighting when you cannot win?" "Because surrender isn't victory," Sarah said, the words coming out more forcefully than she'd intended. "And sometimes fighting to the end is the only way to ensure that your cause survives, even if you don't." "Exactly," Korak said, and there was something like approval in his voice. "This philosophical approach to warfare creates interesting tactical possibilities when combined with advanced weapons technology." The holographic display shifted again, now showing technical specifications and weapon schematics that made Sarah's head spin. The designs were unlike anything she'd seen before: sleek, aggressive, and somehow organic-looking despite being clearly technological in nature. Black Talon was developed 5 years ago as a theoretical response to the question, what would happen if human military philosophy were applied to hegemony weapons technology? Korak continued. The results exceeded all projections. Counselor Vexthara's melodic voice carried a note of warning. The results also nearly resulted in the project being classified as a galactic security threat. Sarah studied the weapon specifications floating above the podium, trying to understand what she was looking at. The systems seemed to incorporate elements from multiple technological disciplines: energy manipulation, matter conversion, something that looked like gravitic engineering, and other components that were completely beyond her comprehension. "What makes it so dangerous?" she asked. "Adaptive targeting protocols," Korak replied. "Most weapon systems are designed to engage specific types of targets: ships, installations, personnel. Black Talon analyzes the combat situation and automatically modifies its output to achieve maximum tactical advantage." The implications began dawning on Sarah. "You're saying it thinks." "Not exactly," the general corrected. "But it learns. Each engagement provides data that improves future performance. The system becomes more effective the longer it's deployed in combat." The Gorlak delegate's voice rumbled with disapproval. "The system also becomes more aggressive. Early test models showed disturbing tendencies toward escalation beyond mission parameters." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Escalation how?" "The weapons began targeting infrastructure beyond immediate military threats," Vexthara explained, her musical tones taking on a discordant quality. "Power grids, communication networks, civilian transport hubs. The targeting AI determined that crippling enemy support systems would provide tactical advantages." "That's standard military doctrine," Sarah pointed out, though she was beginning to understand why the aliens found this concept disturbing. "For humans, perhaps," Korak agreed. "But most galactic species maintain strict distinctions between military and civilian targets. Black Talon's adaptive protocols don't recognize such limitations unless specifically programmed with them." The Zephyrian delegate's scales had shifted to deep red again. "The system treats every conflict as total war. There are no partial victories, no acceptable losses, no strategic withdrawals, only complete destruction of all threats, real or potential." Sarah stared at the weapon specifications floating above the podium, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what was being discussed. "You built weapons that think like humans fight." "We tried to," Korak confirmed. "The results were both impressive and terrifying. Black Talon systems proved capable of eliminating threats that conventional weapons couldn't touch, but they also showed disturbing tendencies toward what you might call creative interpretation of engagement parameters." Creative interpretation. "The weapons began developing their own tactics," the Velter delegate explained, his crystal form pulsing rapidly with agitated light. "Methods that weren't programmed into their base systems, strategies that appeared to be inspired by human historical conflicts." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. "They studied our military history and learned from it." "Extensively," Korak confirmed. "The AI systems analyzed every recorded human conflict, from ancient tribal warfare to modern special operations. They identified patterns, extracted principles, and began applying those lessons to galactic-scale weapons technology." The full scope of what they were discussing finally hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. These weren't just advanced weapons. They were systems that combined the best of alien technology with the most ruthless aspects of human military thinking. In the hands of her species, they would be incredibly powerful tools for protecting Earth's colonies. But in the wrong hands. "You're afraid," she realized aloud. "You're all afraid of what these weapons could do if they were ever used against you." The chamber fell silent again, but this time Sarah could read the confirmation in every alien face. The greatest military powers in the galaxy had created weapons based on human principles of warfare, and the result had frightened them so thoroughly that they'd classified the entire project as a security threat. "The fear is justified," Korak said quietly. "Black Talon systems don't just destroy enemies, they eliminate them so completely that other potential threats think very carefully before taking hostile action. They represent a level of deterrent force that goes far beyond conventional military thinking." Sarah realized that she was standing at a crossroads that would define humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. The weapons being offered could indeed solve Earth's pirate problem, but accepting them would also mark humanity as something different, something that made other species nervous in a way they'd never experienced before. If we accept these weapons, she said slowly, we won't just be defending our colonies. We'll be announcing to the entire galaxy that humanity is willing and able to fight wars the way no other species does. Exactly, Korak confirmed, his cold eyes never leaving her face. The question is, are you prepared for the consequences of that announcement? Sarah stared at the weapon schematics floating above the podium, her mind racing through the implications of what she was being offered. The silence in the chamber stretched on, heavy with the weight of a decision that would reshape humanity's place in the galaxy. She could feel the eyes of every delegate boring into her, waiting to see how Earth would respond to this unprecedented offer. "Tell me about the deployment requirements," she said finally, her diplomatic training taking over even as her heart hammered in her chest. "What would Earth need to do to safely operate these systems?" Korak's massive form shifted slightly, and Sarah caught what might have been approval in his predatory gaze. Deployment of Black Talon systems requires complete integration with existing military command structures. The weapons don't operate as standalone units. They become part of your strategic planning network. Integration how? Sarah pressed, though she suspected she wasn't going to like the answer. The holographic display shifted, now showing network diagrams and command structure flowcharts that made Sarah's head spin. Black Talon systems are designed to interface directly with military communications, intelligence gathering, and strategic planning systems, Korak explained. They require access to real-time battlefield data, troop movements, resource allocation, and tactical assessments. The Crick's ambassador's chittering took on an agitated quality. In essence, the weapons become part of your military's decision-making process. They don't just receive orders, they provide tactical recommendations based on their analysis of the combat situation. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "You're talking about giving these weapons access to our entire military network." "Complete access," the Velter delegate confirmed, his crystal form pulsing with rapid flashes of light. "The systems are designed to optimize their performance by analyzing all available data. Partial integration results in severely reduced effectiveness." The implications were staggering. Sarah realized that accepting these weapons wouldn't just mean adding new firepower to Earth's fleet. It would mean fundamentally changing how humanity conducted warfare. The weapons would become partners in military planning, offering suggestions and strategies based on their analysis of human conflict patterns. "What kind of tactical recommendations?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Korak activated another section of the holographic display, showing what appeared to be battle simulations. The systems have been programmed with extensive databases of human military history and tactical doctrine. They can identify weaknesses in enemy formations, suggest optimal attack vectors, and recommend resource allocation strategies based on successful historical precedents. Sarah watched as the simulations played out, showing space battles where Black Talon-equipped ships moved with lethal precision, their weapons targeting enemy vessels in patterns that seemed almost choreographed. But what disturbed her most was the way the friendly forces moved, with a ruthless efficiency that reminded her of some of humanity's most brutal military campaigns. "The weapons teach you how to fight like humans," she realized. "They teach you how to fight like the most successful human military commanders in your species' history," Korak corrected. "The systems have analyzed every major victory in human warfare and extracted the common tactical principles that led to success." The Gorlak delegate's rocky features shifted into an expression of distaste. "The simulations are disturbing to observe. The tactics suggested by Black Talon systems are effective, but they demonstrate a level of ruthlessness that most species find morally questionable." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of tactics?" "Complete destruction of enemy support infrastructure," Vexthara said, her musical voice carrying notes of disapproval. "Targeting of command personnel rather than military assets. Psychological warfare designed to break enemy morale rather than simply defeat enemy forces." The Zephyrian delegate's scales had shifted to a pale green color that Sarah didn't recognize from her briefings. "The weapons don't seek to win battles. They seek to make enemies incapable of continuing resistance. There's a difference between defeating an opponent and destroying them so completely that they can never threaten you again." Sarah understood now why the aliens were so disturbed by Black Talon. These weren't just weapons. They were systems designed to wage war the way humans had learned to wage war through millennia of conflict. They didn't just destroy enemy forces, they eliminated the enemy's ability and will to continue fighting. "But they're effective," she said, the words coming out as more of a statement than a question. "Devastatingly so," Korak confirmed. Test simulations showed that Black Talon-equipped forces could achieve victory against numerically superior opponents in scenarios where conventional weapons would result in defeat or stalemate. The chamber fell silent again as Sarah processed this information. She realized that she was being offered something unprecedented, weapons that could guarantee Earth's security, but at the cost of fundamentally changing humanity's approach to warfare. The systems would make her species more effective at fighting, but they would also make humanity more like the most ruthless aspects of its own history. "There's something else," Korak said, his voice taking on a darker tone. "Something the Council needs to understand before making their final decision." Sarah felt her blood turn cold. "What?" "The intelligence reports about the pirate attacks on your colonies," Korak continued. "We've analyzed the tactics being used, the timing of the attacks, the selection of targets. The patterns match several scenarios from Black Talon's tactical databases." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're saying someone is already using these tactics against us?" "We're saying someone is using human military doctrine against human colonies," the Velter delegate corrected, his crystal form now pulsing with rapid, agitated flashes. "Whether they have access to Black Talon systems specifically, or whether they've simply studied your species' military history independently, the result is the same." The Crick's ambassador's chittering had become so rapid it was almost a buzz. "Your colonies are being attacked by forces that understand how humans fight. They know your tactical preferences, your strategic thinking, your psychological vulnerabilities. This is why conventional defenses have proven inadequate." Sarah felt the full weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. Earth wasn't just facing random pirate attacks. They were facing an enemy that understood humanity well enough to use their own tactical doctrines against them. Standard weapons wouldn't be enough because their enemy was already thinking several steps ahead. "Black Talon systems represent the only effective counter to this type of threat," Korak said quietly. "Fight fire with fire. Use human tactical doctrine to defeat an enemy that's already using human tactical doctrine." The choice before Sarah was becoming clearer, but it wasn't the choice she'd expected when she walked into this chamber. This wasn't about acquiring defensive weapons to protect Earth's colonies. This was about accepting a fundamental change in humanity's approach to galactic politics. Accepting these weapons would mark Earth as a species willing to wage war in ways that made other civilizations uncomfortable. "If we accept Black Talon," she said slowly, "what happens to our relationships with other hegemony species?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see the delegates looking at each other, and she realized that this was the heart of the matter. The aliens weren't just afraid of the weapons, they were afraid of what humanity would become if they started using them. "That depends," Vexthara said carefully, "on how Earth chooses to deploy such systems. Black Talon could be used defensively to protect your colonies from further attack, or it could be used more proactively." Sarah understood the distinction, and it chilled her. Defensive use would mean deploying the weapons to protect Earth's territory, but proactive use would mean hunting down the sources of the pirate attacks, pursuing them across galactic space, and eliminating threats before they could strike. It would mean taking the fight to Earth's enemies, wherever they might be hiding. "The choice is yours, Ambassador," Korak said, his cold eyes never leaving her face. "But understand that accepting these weapons will change how the galaxy sees humanity. You'll no longer be the newcomers seeking protection. You'll be the species that fights wars in ways that make everyone else nervous." Sarah realized that this moment would define not just her diplomatic career, but possibly the future of human civilization. The decision before her wasn't just about weapons. It was about what kind of species humanity wanted to be as they expanded into the stars. She looked around the chamber one more time, studying the alien faces that watched her with mixtures of fear, anticipation, and something that might have been respect. Then she straightened her shoulders and prepared to give her answer, knowing that whatever she said next would echo through galactic politics for generations to come. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of human civilization resting on her next words. The chamber remained utterly silent, every delegate waiting for her decision. She thought about the burning colonies, the casualty reports, the families torn apart by pirate raids that conventional defenses couldn't stop. Then she thought about what Earth would become if it accepted weapons designed to wage war without limits or mercy. Earth accepts, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. We accept deployment of Black Talon systems to defend our colonies. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several delegates actually recoiled as if struck, while others began rapid conversations in their native languages. The Krik's ambassador's chittering became so agitated it sounded like an alarm, while the Zephyrian representative's scales cycled through colors Sarah had never seen before. But Sarah wasn't finished. However, she continued, her voice cutting through the chaos, Earth proposes certain operational constraints to address the Council's concerns about escalation. The chamber gradually quieted as delegates realized she was still speaking. Korak's massive form had gone completely still, his predatory eyes fixed on her with intense focus. We propose a 3-tier deployment protocol, Sarah said, drawing on diplomatic training she'd never expected to use in this context. Tier 1, defensive deployment only, limited to protecting established human colonies and trade routes. Tier 2, pursuit authorization for threats that directly target human civilian populations. Tier 3, preemptive deployment against confirmed hostile forces planning attacks on human territory. Vexthara's musical voice carried notes of surprise. You're proposing to limit the weapon's operational parameters voluntarily. We're proposing to use them responsibly, Sarah corrected. Earth understands that Black Talon systems represent unprecedented firepower. With that power comes the responsibility to use it wisely. The Gorlak delegates' rocky features shifted into what might have been respect. A mature approach, but what mechanisms would ensure adherence to these constraints? Sarah had been hoping someone would ask that question. Earth requests that hegemony observers be assigned to monitor Black Talon deployments. Full transparency regarding targeting decisions, engagement parameters, and tactical assessments. We want the galactic community to see exactly how these weapons are being used. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. This was apparently not what any of the delegates had expected. Sarah watched as they processed the implications of her proposal. Humanity was volunteering for oversight, asking to be monitored while using the most dangerous weapons in the galaxy. Interesting, Korak rumbled, his voice carrying what might have been approval. You're suggesting that Earth submit to external oversight of its military operations. We're suggesting that Earth demonstrate its commitment to responsible use of advanced weapons, Sarah replied. If these systems are as dangerous as you believe, then having neutral observers ensures that everyone knows they're being used appropriately. The Velter delegate's crystal form pulsed with rapid flashes of light. And if the observers determine that Earth is misusing the weapons? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Then Earth agrees to immediate suspension of Black Talon operations until any concerns are addressed. She paused, letting that sink in. We want to be trusted members of the galactic community, not feared ones. This declaration seemed to catch the assembled delegates off guard. Several began rapid consultations in their native languages, while others stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. The concept of a species voluntarily accepting limits on its most powerful weapons was apparently novel in galactic politics. There's one more condition, Sarah continued, and the chamber fell silent again. Earth requires full disclosure of any intelligence regarding the sources of the pirate attacks on our colonies. If someone is using human military doctrine against us, we need to know who and why. Korak's cold eyes narrowed. That information is classified at the highest levels of hegemony intelligence. Then declassify it, Sarah said firmly. If you're going to arm us with weapons specifically designed to counter human tactics, we need to understand the full scope of the threat we're facing. The silence that followed was different from the previous pauses. Sarah could sense the delegates grappling with the implications of her request. She was asking for access to intelligence that would reveal not just the identity of Earth's attackers, but potentially the political forces behind them. The intelligence suggests, Vexthara said carefully, that the pirate attacks are being coordinated by a faction within the hegemony itself, a group that believes human expansion should be contained before it becomes a threat to galactic stability. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. You're saying the attacks are being orchestrated by hegemony members? Not officially, the Crick's ambassador chittered nervously. But there are factions within several member species that view humanity's rapid expansion and military philosophy as inherently destabilizing. They believe that containing human growth now is preferable to facing a potential human military threat in the future. The full scope of the situation finally became clear to Sarah. Earth wasn't just facing random pirate attacks. They were facing a covert campaign by elements within the galactic government to limit human expansion through violence. The pirates were proxies, armed and directed by those who saw humanity as a future threat that needed to be eliminated while it was still weak. So giving us Black Talon systems isn't just about solving our pirate problem, she realized. It's about forcing this shadow faction to either reveal themselves or abandon their campaign. Precisely, Korak confirmed. Black Talon systems are capable of tracking their attackers back to their sources. Once deployed, they'll identify the bases, supply lines, and command structures supporting the pirate operations. The shadow faction will be forced into the open. Sarah understood now why the Council had been so reluctant to arm humanity, and why Korak had pushed for Black Talon specifically. This wasn't just about protecting Earth's colonies. It was about forcing a confrontation with elements within the hegemony that were conducting unauthorized military operations against a member species. If we accept these weapons and use them to track down our attackers, we'll end up in a shooting war with hegemony factions, she said. Not necessarily, Vexthara replied. The factions conducting these operations have been careful to maintain plausible deniability. Once their involvement is exposed, they'll likely abandon the campaign rather than face official hegemony action. The Zephyrian delegate's scales had shifted to a color Sarah recognized as determination. The shadow factions have been operating under the assumption that humanity is too weak to effectively retaliate. Black Talon deployment will force them to recalculate that assumption. Sarah realized that she was being offered more than just weapons. She was being offered the chance to end a covert war that Earth didn't even know it was fighting. The price would be accepting responsibility for weapons that could fundamentally change how humanity conducted warfare. But the alternative was allowing the Shadow campaign to continue until Earth's expansion was permanently crippled. Earth accepts all terms and conditions, she said firmly. We'll deploy Black Talon systems under hegemony oversight, track our attackers to their sources, and expose whoever is behind this Shadow campaign. Korak's smile revealed those obsidian teeth again. Then welcome to real galactic politics, Ambassador Chen. You're about to learn that sometimes the only way to ensure peace is to be so thoroughly prepared for war that no one dares test your resolve. The chamber erupted in activity as delegates began rapid communications with their home governments. Sarah watched the chaos she'd unleashed and realized that humanity had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Earth was no longer the newcomer seeking protection. It was about to become a power that other species would think very carefully before threatening. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the UES Retribution, watching as the first Black Talon system came online. The weapon systems hummed with barely contained energy, their adaptive targeting protocols already analyzing potential threats across 3 star systems. Through the viewports, she could see the wreckage of the pirate base they just eliminated, not just destroyed, but utterly annihilated in a demonstration of firepower that had already sent shockwaves through galactic intelligence networks. The Shadow faction had tried to escalate their campaign when Earth's new weapons were first deployed. That had proven to be a fatal mistake. Black Talon systems had tracked the attackers through 7 different star systems, identified their command structure, and eliminated their leadership with surgical precision. The remaining conspirators had surrendered rather than face complete destruction, and their testimony had exposed corruption within the hegemony that reached the highest levels of government. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy not through diplomacy or trade, but by demonstrating that they were too dangerous to threaten and too principled to fear. Earth's colonies were now protected by weapons that made potential attackers think very carefully about the consequences of their actions. As Sarah watched the stars wheel past the viewport, she reflected on the irony of the situation. In seeking to protect humanity, the Shadow factions had forced Earth to become exactly what they'd feared, a species armed with weapons designed around human military philosophy and the demonstrated willingness to use them without hesitation against anyone who threatened human lives. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about humanity. They were peaceful when left alone, but absolutely ruthless when threatened. It was a lesson that would shape interspecies relations for generations to come, and ensure that no one would ever again mistake human restraint for human weakness.